The candle was small, no larger than a child's hand. Its flame quivered, a tiny heartbeat of light in the breathless dark. In a world ruled by shadows, it was more than wax and wick. It was hope, fragile and forbidden, flickering in a chapel where silence had devoured prayer. She stood before the altar, her fingers cracked and pale, trembling above the glow like wings over a dying ember. The cold bit into her skin like teeth, gnawing the bones beneath her flesh. The air stank of moldy incense and the ghost of old wine. The priest's body still knelt in the corner, blackened with the plague, his jaw sagging open in an endless sermon to no one. No bell had tolled for his soul. No hymn had carried him home. The girl's breath steamed in the air, curling around the stolen light as if it feared the dark, too. Outside, the village groaned in sleep, doorways chalked with crosses of ash, cradles stilled by silence. Mothers pressed rosaries to lips cracked with fever. Fathers dug graves by the light of moons they no longer trusted. She wasn't stealing, not truly. She was surviving. The cloak she wore had once belonged to her mother, a threadbare shroud that still smelled faintly of smoke and milk. She drew it tight, cradling the candle against her breast as if warmth itself were a child. And then she ran, out into the night. The snow lay deep, swallowing her footprints as quickly as they were made, as though the earth conspired to hide her sin. The sky hung low and bruised, clouds swollen with more white death. Her shadow stretched long behind her, cast by the wavering flame. Shadows of the dead, of crimes too quiet to scream. But in a village where famine feasted on bones and fever ruled like a crowned king, even light could damn you. Someone had seen her, or heard her, or perhaps the walls themselves whispered her betrayal into the ears of those who still believed that God was watching. By dawn, the tree stood waiting, the one they called the Justice Oak, its roots curled like claws in the frozen soil. The villagers gathered without words, eyes hollow, cheeks raw from the wind, faith coiled tight in their throats. They needed punishment, not for her sin, but for their fear. Fear needed blood. Fear needed burial. They did not speak her name. No mother wept for her. No father claimed her. The candle lay broken at her knees when they dragged her through the snow. Its flame had died hours ago, snuffed out like mercy. The earth opened with a soundless hunger as they turned the dirt. A prayer was mumbled, ragged, unsure, before the first shovelful fell. And when the soil closed over her, the world seemed quieter. Not because she was guilty, but because she was forgotten. The candle had gone out, but the story had just begun. He was there when they buried her. Small, half hidden in the crowd of stone faces, his breath frosting in the bitter air. He had no name to give her, only the shape of her in his memory, a thin figure running through the snow with light cupped in her hands like a secret prayer. The boy's fingers clenched the hem of his tunic until the nails cut his palms. He wanted to look away when the rope bit her wrists, when they dragged her toward the hole gouged in the earth. But his eyes refused to close. They burned her into him. The tilt of her chin, the bruises flowering on her skin, the way her lips moved in soundless words only the cold could hear. No one spoke her crime aloud. They didn't need to. In 1348, hunger was law, and law was hunger. A stolen candle was not theft. It was treason. It was heresy. It was a spark too dangerous in a land choking on darkness. The snow hissed as it fell, soft and relentless, settling on her hair like a mockery of halos. The villagers' breaths came ragged, like prayers torn in half. Some crossed themselves, others did not bother. The plague had made cynics of saints, saints of cowards. When the earth closed over her, the sound was wet and heavy, a thud that seemed to shake the boy's ribs. He tasted iron in his mouth and did not know why. Perhaps he had bitten his tongue. Perhaps it was something deeper. He lingered after the others drifted away, their shadows melting into the white. The justice oak loomed black against the gray sky. Its limbs hung with old ropes that swayed like dead men dancing. The mound where she lay was small, too small. He stared at it until the snow erased the shape, until even God might forget where she slept. And in that silence, something rooted inside him, a terrible knowing. That light was dangerous, that goodness could damn you, that the world was not ruled by heaven or hell, but by fear. He turned and walked home through streets that stank of rot and smoke, past doors sealed with ash and wax, past dogs gnawing the ribs of men. He did not look back, but the shape of her with the candle, followed him like a shadow that would never let go. Far behind him, beneath the frozen soil, a drop of wax clung to her palm. Cold, white, waiting, the ground does not forget. It groans with secrets in the deep hours, when the frost thickens and the stars blink like dying embers in the black. That night, when the boy returned to his pallet of straw, he dreamed of roots curling through her hair, of worms lacing her fingers like rings. He dreamed of the candle still burning under the earth, its flame licking at the dark, refusing to die. But the dead are never truly silent. By the third night, the snow had buried the mound, smooth and white as a winding sheet. Yet some swore they heard it. Low murmurs like prayers hummed through teeth clenched against the cold. The gravedigger spat into the wind and said it was foxes. The old woman at the well said it was souls clawing at heaven's gate. The boy said nothing. He only watched the oak from his window, its branches raking the sky like black talons. Every creak was a whisper. Every whisper was her. And then came the scratching. It started faint, a sound so thin it could have been the hiss of sleet on wood. But it grew, a slow, hollow scraping that wandered beneath the soil like something searching for a way out. The villagers began to keep their shutters latched, their rosaries tight in their fists. Some muttered that they had buried her wrong, that the prayer was broken, that the sin was still alive. On the fifth night, the dogs howled, long, ragged howls that rose from every hovel and bled into the dark. The boy woke to the sound and crept to the window. The justice oak stood stark against the snow, its ropes writhing in the wind like serpents. And there, just there, beneath the drift, he thought he saw it, a trembling, a rise in the white, as if the earth had drawn a breath. He stumbled back from the glass, heart battering his ribs. The candle burned in his mind's eye, casting its glow against the coffin's lid, warming the dead girl's hands as she whispered through the dark, whispered of hunger, whispered of light, whispered that she was not finished. And in that moment, the boy knew something unholy had rooted in the soil. Not a body, but a story. And stories do not rot. They rise. The plague had silenced many things: laughter, feasts, the drone of markets, but it had not stilled the bells. Until now. The village bell was iron and old, a relic hoisted high in the steeple like a sentinel of faith. It tolled for birth, for death, for prayers stretched thin as hunger. But when the priest rotted on the altar and the acolytes fled into the woods, The bell ceased its voice. 3 weeks of stillness. 3 weeks of sky untouched by sound. On the seventh night after the burial, the boy woke again, torn from sleep by a noise that made his marrow ache. It was not the whispering now. It was not the scratching. It was something heavier, holier. The bell. He stumbled barefoot into the frost, his breath breaking in the black air. The steeple loomed above him, gaunt and gray, its spire spearing the swollen clouds. And there, swinging slow as a pendulum of doom, was the bell. Its iron throat shuddered with each cry, spilling sound into the night like blood from a wound. But there was no rope in sight, no hand on the wheel. The boy's stomach turned to water. He edged closer, each crunch of snow loud as a scream. The church gaped before him, its doors yawning wide, its shadows deep and cold. The altar still bore the stain of the priest's decay, and the air stank of death and incense. And then he saw them. Footprints, small, bare, stamped deep in the snow like bruises on the earth, leading from the justice oak to the chapel doors. He followed them with his breath caged in his throat, his heart galloping. Each step dragged him deeper into a truth he could not name. The prince stopped at the altar, where the wax from the stolen candle gleamed like a tear upon the stone. And then the bell stopped, mid-swing, frozen in the dark. The silence after was worse than the sound. Heavy, choking, a silence that pressed against his skull like a hand. He turned to flee, but the door groaned shut on its hinges, slow as a dying breath. And in that suffocating stillness, something moved behind him. It began with a crow, a black shard against the dawn, wings slick as wet ink. It perched on the justice oak and bent its neck toward the mound beneath, croaking a sound that cracked through the frozen quiet like old timber splintering. The boy saw it first, peering from the fog-milked fringe of the trees where he had hidden his fear for 7 nights. The mound was not a mound anymore. The snow had sloughed away, eaten by the earth as if in shame. What lay there now was bare soil, dark, soft, and freshly breathed. Not clawed, not torn, but lifted, like the ground itself had sighed open and closed again. The boy's lips moved around a prayer he could not remember, words stripped from his tongue by terror. His fingers gripped the bark until splinters bled into his palms. Then he heard it, not from above but below, a sound like rain on a coffin lid, light and cruel, a trickle of soil shifting where soil should sleep. The crow cawed again and took wing, scattering frost with the beat of its feathers. And the boy ran. He tore through the hush of snowfields, breath slashing the air, until the village crouched before him like a heap of broken bones. No one saw him come. No one heard his gasping, because the air was heavy with another sound, a low hum, braided of whispers and sobbing wind. It seeped from shutters. It seeped from souls. They had seen it too. The villagers ringed the mound by noon, their faces gray as the sky, their eyes full of nails. The priest's bell rope dangled like a vein from the steeple, slack and bloodless. No bell dared toll for this. "She stirs," rasped a voice, a man whose beard was stiff with frost and fear. "The witch stirs." "She was no witch," spat the old woman from the well, though her hands clutched the rosary so hard it bit blood from her knuckles. "She was a child." "Child or not," another growled, "she stole from the altar." "She stole light." Light. That was the word that bound them in silence. For in a world where darkness ruled the days, light was dearer than breath, and theft of it was sin without measure. But sins, they thought, do not rise. Yet the earth trembled again, just a quiver like a heart shuddering under ribs, but enough. Enough to make every gaze falter toward the mound where the soil now pulsed, as if remembering the shape of the girl's body. The boy stood behind them all, a thread in the weave of fear. He said nothing when the gravedigger fetched his spade. He said nothing when the men knelt, fingers curling into dirt, gone wet with melt and dread. They dug. The first shovelful sighed like lungs emptying. The second struck something hard, not wood, but something softer, something that yielded like flesh gone cold. A gasp frayed the air. The third cut deep, and then came the cry. Not from lips, but from throats around the pit, voices snapping like rope under strain. For there she was, the girl. Her hair was black with soil, her skin chalked with frost. But her eyes, God help them, her eyes were open, wide as hunger, white as fear, and her hands. They were raw, red rags of flesh, nails torn to ribbons, fingers crooked from clawing at the dark. But in one of them, clutched like a relic, was the stub of the candle. Snuffed, cold, but there. She breathed, whimpered a voice. Look. And they saw it. The faintest mist, trembling from her lips like smoke from an ember. Alive, alive after earth and prayer and sin. A woman shrieked and flung her kerchief into the pit like a curse. Men crossed themselves until their arms ached. The boy stared, his blood singing like iron in a forge. For in her eyes, past the milk of death, he saw it. A light that was not of heaven, a light that burned like vengeance. They dragged her out beneath the noon sky, her limbs limp as ropes, her breath rasping like wind in a hollow bone. And as they bore her to the chapel steps, the bell, mute for weeks, gave a single toll. One note, deep as a grave. It shook the steeple. It shook their souls. And in that shudder of sound, the boy knew the earth had not given her back in mercy. It had given her back in wrath. They bound her wrists with flax rope, coarse as the tongues that lashed her name through the air. The rope bit into her flesh, streaking her arms with red like runes, scrawled by rage. She did not flinch, not when they dragged her across the frost-stiff earth, not when they cast her down before the oak where the first sentence had sealed her in soil. Her eyes moved, slow as moons, across the faces that ringed her. Faces she had known, faces she had trusted, faces now carved with fear sharp as blades. The justice bench creaked under the weight of the elders, their fur mantles steamed with breath, their fingers jeweled with frost. The law was a husk now, gnawed by plague, hollowed by hunger. But it still wore the mask of order. The Reeve stood first. His voice was gravel. You stole from God. The girl's lips cracked when they parted. Her voice was ash. I borrowed from fire. A hiss slithered through the crowd. The Reeve's fist struck the oak post, rattling its chains. You broke the seal of sanctity. You brought plague upon our hearths. Her gaze drifted past him, past the bench, past the noose swaying like a tongue from the gallows beam. It found the boy, half hid in the throng, his bones quaking under rags. And for the breath of a heartbeat, her eyes softened. Then they hardened again, iron under ice. I brought light, she whispered. The murmur swelled, fear thick with fury. A woman spat into the snow. A man crossed himself thrice. She lay 7 nights in consecrated ground, croaked the gravedigger, face mottled with terror. No soul returns from such sleep unless hell holds its leash. Witch, breathed someone, then louder. Witch! The word bloomed like rot, spreading mouth to mouth until the air was black with it. Witch, Which? Which? The reeve raised his hand and the din died, but not the dread. The law will speak, he said, and God will burn the truth from her bones. The pyre was built before the dusk, timber hacked from the plague-dead woods, resin gleaming like tears along the grain. They lashed her to the stake, her breath a pale thread in the bleeding light. The boy pressed through the throng, his heart a drum of doom. He saw the candle still in her grasp, clinging even as the ropes gnawed her wrists. And then a sound split the hush. Not the crack of tinder, not the sob of wind, the bell, again, one toll, low as thunder crawling through earth. Heads turned toward the steeple, spines stiff as spears. The rope hung limp, the wheel was still. But the bell swung, slow, deliberate, like a tongue mouthing a curse. And in that tolling gloom, the girl lifted her head, her lips curved. Not in prayer, not in plea, but in a smile carved from shadow and flame. And the boy knew the night would not end with ash. It would end with fire and something more, something waiting beyond the wood smoke, beyond the wail of bells, something that would walk when the embers died. The snow had no mercy that winter. It fell like torn pages from heaven, blank and endless, until the earth forgot its color. Beneath it, the mound that held her body lay small and cruel, a bruise upon the whiteness, one patch where the snow would not settle, where the earth steamed faintly as if refusing to swallow its sin. No one spoke of her after that morning, not in daylight, not in whispers. The old women crossed themselves twice when the wind blew from the churchyard, and the men fixed their eyes on the frozen ground when the word candle slipped into talk. But silence is a treacherous thing. It does not erase, it festers. The boy, his name was Ansel, could not stop seeing her hands. Pale, cracked things, fluttering against the rope like startled doves before the dirt claimed them. He saw them in sleep, pressed against his chest, as if pleading through the darkness. He had not meant to watch. He had only followed the others, too cold to stay behind. But when the shovels bit the ground and the priest's voice rasped out the last prayer, something inside him had broken and bled out, unseen. Now, 3 nights after, he sat awake in the loft of his father's hall, the wind clawing at the thatch, carrying the far-off moan of wolves. His father snored below, drunk on watered ale, and his mother muttered in dreams, her rosary slipping from her hands. Ansel's breath plumed before him in the moonlight. He clutched his blanket tighter and stared through the smoke hole at the starless sky. He thought of her face, the way her hair had stuck in wet strings to her cheeks, her lips pale as candle wax. She had not cried, not once, not even when they bound her wrists and pushed her to her knees. She had only looked at the ground, at a single stone half buried in the snow, as though its gray stillness was safer than all the eyes upon her. Why had no one spoken for her? Why had no one stopped it? The candle. It was always the candle, as if that small stub of light could weigh more than a soul. He pulled the blanket over his head and tried to pray, but the words were heavy things, thick in his mouth. Bless her soul, he whispered, though he did not know if God was listening anymore. The plague had taken Father Mathieu, taken his own sister last spring, taken the baker's son and the miller's wife. The priest's body still rotted in the chapel, stiff as old bread, and no one dared move it. Who would hear prayers now? A creak, soft like a hinge shifting. Ansel froze. The loft ladder shivered in the dark. He held his breath. For a moment, nothing. only the wheeze of his father's sleep. Then, faint as smoke, the smell reached him, tallow and ash, the smell of the chapel, the smell of her. He flung the blanket aside and peered over the loft edge. Shadows crouched below, long and crawling in the fire's last glow. The hearth embers hissed as if something damp had touched them. Father? His voice was a thread. No answer. And then he saw it. Near the door where the snow had seeped under the sill, a shape knelt. Small, thin, a twist of rags like a child crouching in prayer. He blinked, heart hammering. It did not move. Ansel clambered down, his bare feet kissing the cold rungs, his breath loud in his ears. The shape blurred in the gloom, pale fingers glimmering where moonlight licked them. Who's there? The thing raised its head, and for a heartbeat, the world was a candle's breadth wide, fragile, trembling, about to go dark. Eyes stared back at him, hollow and bright as molten frost. Ansel stumbled, his heel skidding in ash. The door moaned open on its own, a gust clawing through, scattering sparks like fireflies. And the shape, gone. Vanished into the white howl outside, only the smell remained. And in the hearth, among the dying embers, something lay curled and blackened. The stub of a candle melted to a tear. The snow keened against the walls. Ansel sank to his knees, clutching the edge of the hearth as if to anchor himself to the living world. But deep inside, he knew. Some lights, once stolen, never go out. They follow, they wait, and they burn not with warmth, but with hunger. Outside, far beyond the sleeping village, the church bell rang. No hands touched it, no wind could have swung it. But it tolled, once, then silence, deep as a grave. The bell's toll clung to the night like a broken bone in silence. Sharp, aching, wrong. Ansel sat rigid in the hearth's glow, staring at the stub of wax that hissed and smoked on the stones. His breath came thin, shallow, as though the air itself was strangling him. He told himself it was the wind, that some storm-thrown gust had rattled the iron tongue of the bell in the empty steeple. But no wind sounded like that. Not one clear note, heavy with judgment, rolling over the snow like a priest's last amen. His father stirred and grunted, cursing in his sleep. Ansel dared not wake him. Words would turn to questions. Questions would turn to hands on his shoulders, dragging him back through the morning when earth closed over her face. He could not speak it, not the shape, not the eyes, not the cold that smelled of her. He climbed the ladder to the loft, but sleep had fled like a hunted stag. Every creak was a whisper. Every whisper a name he would not say. He lay staring at the rafters until black gave way to gray, until dawn bled over the horizon like a wound. When the first rooster cried, he rose, numb with weariness, and pulled on his boots. His father still snored by the hearth. His mother bent over a pot, hair veiling her face, humming a hymn too soft for words. Ansel slipped out before her eyes could bind him with questions. The snow was iron under his soles, brittle and hard, the cold gnawing his bones as if they were bread. The village crouched in stillness, roofs hunched like beasts under white pelts, chimneys coughing thin threads of smoke. No voices rose, no dogs barked. Even the air seemed hollow. The church stood at the hill's crest, black against the paling sky. Its doors sagged like a jaw left open in death. Ansel climbed, his breath rasping, his hands clenched inside his sleeves. He did not know why he went. Perhaps to see the rope still coiled where it had bitten her wrists. Perhaps to look upon the altar and swear he had only dreamed. But the chapel met him like a tomb. Frost glazed the steps. The bell rope swayed in the tower's throat, though no wind moved the bare trees. He pushed the door. It moaned inward. The smell struck him first, rank incense gone sour, rat droppings, the sweet sick stench of old decay. The priest lay slumped in his chair still, jaw sagged wide, beads black with grime curled through his fingers. Spiders had woven him a crown of dust. The altar cloth was stained, stiff with wine, turned to blood-dark patches. And there, on the cold stone before it, lay something small and cruel, a single footprint. Bare, child small, pressed into the rime as if the frost itself had clung to her passing. Ansel's throat knotted. He dropped to his knees, touching the hollow with numb fingers. It was real, not shadow, not dream. Real. His breath ghosted the air as he rose and turned and froze. The pews stretched silent in rows, but at the far end, near the font, the water quivered. Once, twice, rippling like a thing alive. The door banged. A shape slid in, a black drape of wool, a woman bent with age. Old Mere, the widow who whispered of omens when smoke curled wrong. Her eyes were chips of flint as they raked him. "What are you here, boy?" Her voice was gravel, worn by winter. Ansel's tongue fumbled. "I heard. The bell." She spat, a dark bead on the frost. "Aye, we all heard, and no rope pulled it." Her gaze fell to the footprint. She sucked in air like a hiss and clutched the crucifix at her breast. "God preserve us," she muttered. "Her soul walks." Ansel's skin crawled. It, it cannot. But Mir was already hobbling past him, her stick clacking on stone, her lips spilling prayers like seeds scattered on barren ground. She stooped to the font, dipped her fingers, and flicked holy water toward the pews. The ripples stilled, but the air felt heavier, thick with breath that was not theirs. "Mark me, boy." Her voice shook now, thin with fear. "When earth takes one unjust, it will not hold her long. Light stolen burns brighter in death." Ansel backed toward the door, his chest tight as a noose. He stumbled out into the morning glare and fled down the hill, the wind knifing his cheeks, the old woman's words gnawing his spine. But as he neared his father's hall, he saw it. Scratched into the frost on the door, each letter crooked, trembling, as if carved by a hand that bled. Candle. He stared until the word blurred, until his breath smoked it to nothing. But the dread did not fade. For in the silence behind him, far up the hill, the bell tolled again. Once, twice, and this time it did not stop. The bell fell silent by dusk, but the sound of it did not die. It lived in the marrow of every villager, a hollow hum threading through their veins like winter sickness. Doors barred early, candles burned low. No laughter rose from hearth or hall. Only whispers, thin as smoke, curling in corners where firelight could not reach. Ansel sat in the shadows, knees drawn to his chest, staring at the frost-scratched word on the door. Candle. He had rubbed it out with his sleeve, but the grooves lingered, etched deep as wounds. His father said nothing, only watched him with those blunt eyes, heavy with questions he would never voice aloud. Men of his blood did not bend to fears of bells or footprints or words that wrote themselves in ice. But the others were not so silent. By nightfall, the village was gathering in the longhouse. Torches spat resin, throwing red onto timbered walls as voices clashed like iron on iron. "It is her," spat old Mere, her back knotted like roots, her eyes blazing white with fevered certainty. "I saw the mark in God's house, bare as birth, sharp as sin. Her soul walks. We buried her wrong." A murmur surged like the sea. Someone muttered of plague spirits, of sins unshriven, of candles stolen from holy flame, the light of Christ profaned by filthy hands. Then the Reeve stood, broad as an ox, his face scarred from wars long past. His voice fell like a hammer. If her spirit walks, it walks because earth cannot stomach her. Such evil festers unless burnt clean. Dig her up, this night. Gasps. Crosses sketched in air. A woman whimpered, but no one spoke against him. Not when fear gnawed so deep it made cowards bold. Not when the bell had tolled of its own accord. Ansel's stomach turned to ice. Dig her up. The words rang like nails driving into wood. They waited for moonrise. The snow shone like bone under a sky drowned in stars. Torches moved along the ridge, little teeth of fire biting the dark. Shovels clinked against stones. Boots ground the frost to powder. Ansel followed, because not to follow was to name himself guilty, and guilt was death when reason froze, and faith burned wild. They came to the hill beyond the gallows tree, where earth still wore the scar of her grave. A black cross leaned crooked over the mound, its shadow stretching like a noose in the moonlight. The men ringed it, their breath smoking like ghosts, their faces masks of hunger and hate. Dig, said the Reeve. Steel bit soil. The rhythm of shovels thudded like a heartbeat, muffled under snow. Frost crust cracked. Earth yielded grudgingly, like flesh under a blade. The smell rose, cold rot, sour and sweet, clinging to the nostrils. Ansel gripped his cloak tight, nails biting his palms. He remembered her eyes, the way they had widened, wild and bright, when they bound her wrists. He remembered the tremor in her breath, the whisper of words no one heard, as the dirt fell like rain. The mound sank. A dull thump sounded, a hollow drum. The coffin. The men pried at the lid. Nails shrieked as iron teeth tore wood. The Reeve seized a torch and thrust it near, his shadow gaping long and bent. The lid groaned, lifted, and the pit filled with silence. Empty. The shroud lay crumpled like shed skin, gray and stiff, clutching nothing but darkness. No bone, no flesh, no face, pale as frost. Only emptiness, yawning like a wound. A cry broke, raw, strangled, from one of the men. Another spat curses and flung his shovel, his voice cracking with terror. Old Mere dropped to her knees, clawing the air, shrieking prayers that tangled into madness. She walks, she wailed, her arms writhing like dead branches in storm. God shield us, she walks! The Reeve stood rigid, his jaw clenched so hard it shuddered. Then his voice ripped through the frenzy. Find her, before dawn, or the curse takes us all. Torches reeled through the dark, scattering like stars torn from heaven. Men ran, stumbling, shouting her name, though none dared speak it hours before. Dogs bayed, thin and wild, as if scenting a wolf that wore a woman's shape. Ansel lingered by the grave, staring into the hollow black where she should have lain. His breath smoked like incense. His heart thudded like a drum of war. He thought of the candle, the little flame cupped in her hands, trembling like a soul begging to live. He thought of her whisper, soft as ash. It is not theft, it is light. And then he heard it. Not the men's cries, not the dogs, not the wind gnawing the pines. A voice, thin as thread, sweet as frost. Ansel. He spun. The hill lay empty, the snow smooth as silk. The torches had gone, swallowed by the trees. Only the cross remained, leaning like a broken spine against the stars. Ansel. The voice again, curling through the dark, from nowhere and everywhere, his blood iced. And in the pit, where the coffin gaped, something moved. Not a shape, not flesh, only a glimmer. a shimmer like molten gold, licking the dark like a tongue of flame. The candle, still burning. They said the bells rang by themselves. At first, no one believed it. But on the seventh night after her burial, as the wind clawed at shutters and wolves cried like widows beyond the moor, the sound came, soft, deliberate, like hands pulling at ropes no living man held. The priest swore it was a warning. The devil had taken root in their earth, and the girl's soul was its gate. She walks, he rasped, his voice cracking like an old beam in the cold. And with her comes famine, fire, pestilence anew. And so they gathered, men with torches, women clutching their rosaries until the beads bled into their palms. Children pressed to skirts, their eyes wide as church doors in a storm. They came to the place where the soil was broken and stared down at the hollow that once held her. The cross they had driven into the mound lay on its side, the wood split as though bitten clean through. No one spoke of wolves anymore, or thieves, or hunger. They spoke only of her, her name, which had not mattered in life, now a curse in every mouth. They saw her, hissed a midwife, her hair silver with frost. By the brook, washing her hands in blood. No, spat the miller. She walks with the candle still. Its flame never dies. She holds it high, as if to mock the holy light. And behind their words, another truth whispered, though none dared give it breath. If the dead could rise, then no grave was safe. No door was shut against the dark. By torchlight they dragged stones to the grave, piling them high, higher than a man's shoulders. The priest murmured prayers between coughs, his lips rimmed in white like snow along a roofline. When the stones were set, he drove iron nails into the wood of the fallen cross, hammering until the sound echoed like war. But even as the last blow fell, a cry went up, a sound so raw it tore the night open. From the church, they ran, through drifts that clawed at their legs, past doors swinging loose like broken teeth, until they reached the chapel where plague had first knelt. The door hung wide. Inside, the altar candles were gone. All but one burned still, at the threshold, its flame a thin, defiant tongue of light in the black nave. And by its glow, they saw something else, something that froze them where they stood. Footprints, bare, wet, leading out into the snow. And as they followed with their eyes, their torches guttering in the wind, they saw the trail vanish into the woods. No one spoke, not even the priest. The only sound was the candle's flame, whispering as it died. The earth was not meant to be woken twice. Yet on that night, 12 men gathered with shovels, their faces chalked pale in the moonlight, their eyes avoiding one another as if names themselves might summon judgment. They stood before the mound of stones, breath coiling into the dark like smoke from unholy fires. No women came, no priest either. He had blessed the tools and gone to his bed, muttering that if faith faltered now, hell would take them all. The first blow fell, a shovel's edge biting frost-bitten soil. It rang like iron against bone. Someone flinched. Another spat a prayer through his teeth. They dug faster. The wind clawed their backs, dragging their torches low, and shadows stretched across the stones like black tongues tasting fear. The boy, Ansel, watched from the hollow of a tree. He had followed like a ghost, his thin boots filling with snow, his breath tight in his ribs. He did not know why he came, only that something in him needed to see. The earth fought them. Roots curled like fingers around the coffin lid, and water seeped into their boots, black and bitter as old wine. When at last they cleared enough to see wood, someone whispered, "God forgive us." The lid bore scratches, deep, desperate. Not like time's work, but like something had clawed from within. One man crossed himself so fast, his rosary snapped. Beads fell like rain into the pit. "Lift it," said another. His voice was wrong, flat, as if borrowed. They pried nails loose. The wood groaned. The lid rose an inch, then two, then a scream tore through the trees. They froze. Every head whipped toward the sound. It came again, high, ragged, childlike, and was gone, swallowed by the fog. The torches wavered. One fell. Its flame hissed out in the wet earth, and smoke curled up like a soul in flight. When they looked back to the pit, the lid was gone. No one saw it move. No one saw hands take it, but it was gone. And the coffin? Empty? Or perhaps not. Something lay within. Something pale, glistening, twisted on itself like a rope left to rot. No face, no form, only the echo of a body unmade or never born. A man vomited over the edge. Another dropped his shovel and ran. And then, as if the night itself had been waiting for their terror to ripen, the bell tolled. Once, twice, thrice. But the church was empty. The priest had no hands on the rope. And in the space between those peals of iron, something breathed, software slow, like earth learning to speak. Ansel pressed his mouth shut to keep the scream inside. He ran. Through the trees, through the drifts, through the hollow, where snow swallowed footprints whole. Ran until the world was only white and black, and the endless sound of his heart pounding like the hammer on that fallen cross. And behind him, though he would never swear it, never speak it, he thought he saw a light, a small, flickering light, weaving between the trees, like a candle. Then the first sound was not a whisper, not truly. It was a thud, dull, distant, almost too soft to notice over the rasp of wind gnawing at the rooftops. The boy stopped when he heard it, his pail trembling in his hands, water rippling like quicksilver under the blue ache of dusk. He listened, breath tight as frost. There it was again, a hollow, muted strike, as if a fist were knocking from under the earth. The burial ground lay beyond the hedge, a mound of shadows pressed against the snow. He told himself it was a branch snapping in the wind, a stone tumbling from the wall. Anything but what it truly sounded like, someone asking to be let out. By the time he returned home, his hands were raw with cold and something else. Fear, that slow-burning fever that no fire can ease. He lay awake in the loft long after the hearth sighed into darkness, listening to the bones of the house groan. He dreamed of earth shifting like a living thing. The next morning, whispers crawled through the village like mice through straw. Old men muttered in doorways, crossing themselves with cracked fingers. Women gathered at the well, voices quivering with the same word, restless. They said the dead were restless. They said graves should not move, but one had. That night, the boy returned to the hedge. Moonlight slicked the frost, casting silver knives across the ground. And there it was, the grave, hunched and broken like a torn mouth. The soil gaped in black hunger. A coffin lid lay split beside the hole, jagged as teeth. His breath coiled white in the air as he stared, throat locked in silence. There were no footprints, no drag marks, just churned mud in the shape of absence. Something had escaped, or something had entered. He ran then, faster than the wind. But even as he fled, he felt the cold clutch of a gaze upon his back, and something watching, patient as the grave itself. The bell rang the next morning. No one had touched the rope, not since Father Baron died where he knelt, lips black, tongue swollen like rotten fruit. The rope had been cut, frayed like a severed vein. Yet the bell sobbed and swayed in the wind, its voice bleeding through the valley, spilling iron sorrow over the fields. The villagers came, torches spitting flame against the gray, faces drawn tight as dried hides. They found the grave as the boy had seen it, open, raw, desecrated, a sin against the earth. "It is the plague," someone whispered, clutching the beads of a rosary with bone-white fingers. "No fox could tear wood like this," said another, pointing to the coffin lid, its splinters curved outward like the ribs of a beast. "They buried her wrong," rasped an old crone, her voice brittle as ice. Her eyes flickered toward the boy, though he said nothing, dared nothing. His tongue was a stone. By dusk, the whispers fattened into words, into rumors so sharp they could flay the soul. She was a thief. She died in sin. She swore herself to shadows before the rope snapped. And beneath all of it, the darkest murmur of all, one they barely dared breathe. She was not dead when they put her under. The boy pressed his palms against his ears until they burned, but the words wormed through the cracks, slithering into his skull. And then came the dreams, dreams slick with mud and candlelight. He saw her face, waxen and strange, framed by hair matted with earth. Her eyes were open, always open, and her lips moved soundlessly, spilling soil as they formed his name. For 3 nights he woke screaming. For 3 nights he prayed. On the 4th, he stopped, because on the 4th, he heard her voice awake. It came with the wind, curling like smoke through the blackthorn hedge, slipping into the cracks of the door, threading through the silence of his room. A sound soft as breath, yet thick with hunger. It said only one thing. Cold, the wind rose first, groaning like a beast prowling the edge of the fields. Then the torches came, blooming like wounds against the dark. Men staggered through the mire with shovels on their backs and fear in their throats, their boots sinking deep into the veins of earth. Behind them followed the women, hoods drawn low, voices trembling with prayers that tasted of iron and ash. The bell kept crying, though no rope swung it. Its voice clanged through the blackness, wild and broken, as though the tower itself had gone mad with grief. Each toll slammed against the ribs of the boy, hollowing him out. He pressed his fists against his ears, but the sound lived inside him now. "Bring salt," hissed a voice. "Bring fire." "They'll burn her bones," muttered another. "She won't burn," croaked the crone, her shadow a splinter among the snow. "Not unless you take the tongue." The boy stumbled after them, though every step clawed his soul raw. He should not be there. He should never have seen the grave. But something dragged him onward. Some dreadful gravity coiled in the roots of the earth. When they reached the burial ground, the torches bent in the wind, their flames licking the night like hungry wolves. The grave yawned wider now, the soil clawed and torn as though by hands desperate for sky. The coffin lay gutted, its nails curled like black thorns. But there was no body. No body. The words scurried through the crowd like a rat, breeding terror in its wake. "They carried her off," someone gasped. "She walked," rasped another. "God blind me, she walked." The priest was dead. The bell had no rope, and yet here they stood in a ring of fire and salt, as if fire and salt could cage what they feared. The crone stepped forward, her cloak dragging like a funeral shroud. In her hands, a jar of lye glimmered pale as bone. She knelt by the torn grave, her fingers trembling like spider legs as she scattered the white dust in a circle. Speak her name, she whispered, though her voice was not hers alone. It was the echo of something older, something damp with earth and blood. But no one spoke. Not one mouth dared shape the syllables of the dead. The boy felt his tongue swell like a root, thick with silence. He knew her name. He had heard it hissed once, sharp as a blade, before they dragged her beneath the tree. He could taste it even now, bitter and warm, a ghost pressed against his teeth. They began to dig, not to bury, but to find. Iron spades tore at the soil, coughing up roots and worms, and the earth groaned like a wounded beast. They dug until their nails bled, until the cold bit so deep their bones rang like bells. And then something struck the wood, not coffin wood, something else, something harder, hollower. The men froze, spades hovering like swords. The wind screamed through the hedges, ripping prayers from lips, shredding them into smoke. Pull it up, someone rasped. No one moved. Pull it up. The boy saw their faces then, smeared with mud and terror, eyes rolling white like oxen in slaughter. He saw the torches shudder in their fists, flames flailing like souls in torment. And he knew, if they opened what slept below, something would follow that could never be buried again. But the spades fell. Wood cracked, splinters flew, and from the black mouth of earth they dragged it up, a box long as a man, bound in iron bands rusted to rot. No mark, no carving, no cross. Only a chain, twisted and eaten with rust, snared tight around the lid as if to choke whatever lay within. The chain rattled as they hauled it into the torchlight. The sound slithered through the night like a serpent waking in winter. Seal of the damned, the crone hissed, her eyes twin pits of coal. The boy stared at the box, his breath curdled in his chest. He felt it then, not sound, not sight, but a weight, thick and pressing, blooming like rot behind his ribs. Something inside was listening. Open it, spat a voice. No. Yes. Open it, or she'll walk again. Hands fumbled for hammers, for hooks, for nails. The first blow rang like a scream. Iron shattered like teeth. The chain writhed loose, coiling into the frost. The lid shuddered. The torches wailed in the wind. And from the dark slit beneath the lid, a breath slipped out. Soft, slow, and wet with earth. The boy dropped to his knees, not in prayer, in surrender, because the breath spoke, and it said his name. The night was colder than death, yet sweat ran down his back as he knelt over the torn earth. His hands shook, not from the frost, but from something older, something that clawed inside his ribs and whispered, "Dig." The grave yawned like a wound, spilling black soil into the snow. He expected her face, pale and still, lips stitched by silence. Instead, the hollow gaped empty. The shape of her coffin was there, its edges soft with rot, but she was gone. The boy stared until his eyes stung. Then, from the darkness below, the soil whispered back a secret, an old, broken breath, not language, but sound, rising from roots. Why did you leave me there? His chest seized. He looked over his shoulder. Nothing. Only mist sliding like a serpent through the crooked crosses. The candle in his fist sputtered, its flame bending away from the grave, as if afraid. He leaned closer. That was when he saw them. Two impressions in the loosened earth. Fingers, pressed upward, reaching, desperate, and claw marks where nails had torn at the lid. The world tilted. His breath left him in a ragged prayer. But before his thoughts could shape into sense, something brushed his wrist. A thread, scarlet, dulled by soil, the same color as the cloak they buried her in. It wound upward from the grave like a vein seeking a heart. He tried to pull back. The thread held fast, tightening, digging into his skin. Then, the sound behind him, snow crushing under bare feet, slow, certain, closer. He turned and saw nothing, nothing but fog. And yet, the church bell, untouched for weeks, groaned in the wind, a hollow, mournful peal rolling across the frozen ground. And his voice cracked the silence. Who's there? But silence has teeth, and it bit down hard. The mist moved. No, not the mist. Something inside it. A figure. Thin. Small. Bent like a broken reed. Her hair hung in ropes, dripping with frost. Her skin was the color of wax. Her eyes, two chapels burned black by plague. She stepped forward without sound, barefoot in the snow, leaving no prints. The boy stumbled back, but the thread on his wrist jerked him toward the grave. He tore at it, clawed until his nails bled, but the knot would not break. It was tied with something stronger than cord. It was tied with hunger. Her lips parted, and soil poured out like blood. Then she smiled. The bell tolled again, and this time, doors slammed. Every cottage, every shutter, every soul in the village turned its face away. The boy screamed, or thought he did. The snow swallowed the sound as the thread yanked him forward into the grave. The candle tumbled from his hand, its flame breaking on the earth like a fallen star. Darkness swallowed everything. The ground closed over him, neat as a seam, until the field was smooth, white, innocent. The wind died, the mist thinned, the church bell fell silent once more. By dawn, the only sign was a single candle, standing upright in the snow. Its wick blackened, its wax still warm to the touch. And when the villagers passed, they swore they heard it breathing. Some nights, when the wind crawls through the graves, a voice hums from the earth, low, sweet, and burning as a prayer. Bring me another light. If these forgotten voices still echo in your soul, walk further with me, subscribe, and let the smoke tell you more stories.